Hello, and welcome to a conversation with John Philip Newell at the Looking Within Center, and brought to you by the Sandbox Cooperative Podcast. John Philip Newell is joining us from Edinburgh, Scotland, and we are coming to you live from Rochester, Minnesota, separated by about 6 hours, I think. We have some friends joining us here in person in our Looking Within Center studio, and wherever you are joining us from, we're so glad that you are here. For a word about the Looking Within Center, I would like to introduce you to Director Julie Stevens.
Thanks, Dave. Welcome to our audience here, to our audience online, and John Philip, welcome to you. We like to think of the Looking Within Center as an oasis for the soul and a launch pad for the spirit. And what is now the Looking Within Center began about 6 years ago. We had a focus on contemplative spirituality through reflection and discovery done in group settings. We love to create welcoming and intentional spaces for people to explore their inner lives alongside others and to experience wholeness through things like guided retreats, Thai Teacher classes, contemplative podcasts and Facebook posts, speaker events like this one, and so much more. It's really a place, both online and in person, just like today, to practice being conscious of Christ's presence in our daily lives. And practicing that consciousness makes for transformation, we think. So we're excited about what our area of ministry does here at Gloria Dei. If you want to track with our work, you can follow us on Facebook or on our Gloria Dei website. And we are so pleased to host this event today with John Philip Newell.
Thanks, Julie. And my name is Dave Berg, and this is my co-host, Chris Roberts. Sandbox Cooperative is a podcast and speaker series dedicated to knocking down walls with curiosity and conversation. We've been at it since 2014.
It's been a little while.
It's been a while, and we continue again this afternoon. So let's get to it, shall we?
Yeah, well, we're excited to welcome John Philip Newell today. John Philip Newell is a Celtic teacher and author of spirituality who calls the modern world to reawaken to the sacredness of the earth and every human being. He lives with his family in Edinburgh, Scotland, as Dave mentioned, and in 2016, John Philip began the School of Earth and Soul. He teaches regularly in the United States and Canada and leads international pilgrimage weeks on Iona in the Western Isles of Scotland. John Philip has authored over 15 books, and today we will discuss his latest one, Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul.
John Philip speaks of himself as a wandering teacher in the tradition, many lone teachers before him in the Celtic world. Wandering Scots, or Scotus Vagans, I hope I'm saying that right, seeking the well-being of the world. He has been described as having the heart of a Celtic bard and the mind of a Celtic scholar. His teachings combine poetic and intellectual, the head as well as the heart, and spiritual awareness as well as political and ecological concern.
So as we start our conversation today, if you have any questions, if you're joining us online, feel free to add them in the chat box and in the comments. We've got a couple people who are watching those, and we'll get those to us. If you're in the room, know that there are cards, and you can pass those along, and we will pass your question along to John Philip and see what he might have to say. And yeah, I guess with that, welcome to our conversation, and welcome John Philip Newell.
So good to have you here, John Philip.
Thank you, Dave and Chris. Very good to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah. As we get started, I just want to thank you for your work. It has been so influential for me personally, and much has informed much of what our faith community here in Rochester has been exploring over the years. I especially loved your latest book, Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul. It's a survey of 9 different Celtic Christian teachers going back to the very early days of Christianity. And as we get started, I'm keenly aware that we are all coming from various places and understandings of Celtic Christian spirituality, Celtic Christian wisdom, and what it's all about. Would you explain it? How would you explain it to a person who knows very little about it?
Yes, I think there are 2 distinguishing features to this stream of wisdom that are distinct from the Mediterranean stream, which has so dominated our Western Christian inheritance, whether in the Roman Catholic tradition or in the Protestant tradition. So the 2 convictions that are to the fore in all of these great teachers that I explore is the belief in the essential sacredness of earth and the belief in the essential sacredness of the human soul, that which is deepest in every human being. So a lot of the Western Christian tradition, as it was influenced by the Mediterranean, especially from the 4th century, when Christianity became religion of empire, what was being emphasized in that dominant stream of Western Christianity came to be known as the Doctrine of Original Sin. And that is the belief that what is deepest in every person is opposed to God rather than being of God. The great Celtic teachers whom I explore in this book are consistently returning to the belief that what is deepest in us is of God rather than opposed to God, which means that the gift of grace is given to us not in opposition to our nature or not in opposition to what is deepest in us, but rather to reconnect us to our of Godness, to reconnect us to the wisdom of the divine that is ours as birthright, as the wisdom literature and the Hebrew scriptures say, wisdom was born with us in our mother's womb, woven into our being. So grace is given to reconnect us to that wisdom, that beauty, that passion, that compassion, that creativity, and above all, the love of God that is at the very core of our being. And what is said about the human mystery, that is, that it's made of God, is said also about every life form. One of the teachers that we hear from very early in the Celtic stream, from 2nd century Gaul, says that everything comes out of the substance of God, or everything comes out of the very womb of the divine. And that's quite an extraordinary word to use for our dualistic Western ears, to hear that we have come out of the substance of God, because it is to say that the substance, the stuff of our physical being is of God, which means that how we handle one another in relationship, how we care for the physical needs of those who are hungry and homeless, how we care for the body of the earth, these are sacred matters. So it is those two strands. They're interrelated, of course, but they are distinct. And that is the sacredness of the earth and the sacredness of the human soul, and thus the title of the book.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's as you read the book, and those are woven. Those two themes are obviously woven through the whole thing. When I read that first paragraph of the introduction, you already feel like you're on you kind of launched out of a rocket and you're on a journey at that point. And I would love to hear that first paragraph in your voice, because I think it kind of comes to my follow-up question. But if you could read that first paragraph of that intro.
Yes. We know things in the core of our being that we have not necessarily been taught. And some of this deep knowing may actually be at odds with what our society or religion has tried to teach us. This book is about reawakening to what we know in the depths of our being, that the earth is sacred, and that this sacredness is at the heart of every human being and life form. To awaken again to this deep knowing is to be transformed in the ways we choose to live and relate and act.
I love that paragraph, and it's the understanding of deep knowing is another strand that just kind of runs through all of the different teachers and through the whole book, runs through 2,000 years of thought, right? And it reminds me of this, the old legend that that I've heard, and I know that it exists, different forms of it in different traditions, that the angel Gabriel, before we are born, tells us all the mysteries of the universe and kisses us on the forehead, and then as soon as we're born, we begin to forget. I think this speaks to both the idea of deep knowing and the recurring theme of soul forgetfulness that exists throughout your book. And I'm wondering if you could talk about these ideas.
Yeah. One of the stories that I think I tell in the book is of giving a talk probably 20 years ago in Virginia. It was around the time that my book, Listening for the Heartbeat of God, was published. And in the talk I was giving in this little church in Virginia, I was exploring some of the foundational themes of Celtic wisdom and speaking about the way Pelagius, one of the first great Celtic teachers, said that when we look into the face of a newborn child, we are looking into the face of God, freshly born among us. And I was questioning the Western doctrine of original sin, which has so dominated Christianity in the Western world. Interestingly, in the East, Eastern Orthodoxy never accepted the doctrine of original sin, so their starting point has been the essential blessedness of what is deepest in the newborn child and every human being. But I was exploring some of these themes, and at the end of my talk that evening, a woman, I think in her 80s, came very purposefully up the central aisle of the church with a copy of Listening for the Heartbeat of God in her hand. And she was coming up the aisle so purposefully that the naughty boy in me thought, she's going to hit me over the head. And I was quite wrong. When she got up to me, she said, I want to show you what I wrote in this book after reading it. And she opened the cover. And inside she had written, I knew it, I knew it, I knew it. And I so often wish I had asked her for that copy, because she said so succinctly what our experience is often when we come across ancient wisdom, ancient truth that we have not necessarily been aware of, we haven't been taught it necessarily, but when we hear it, our deep response is, I knew it. That is, it is in harmony with some of the deepest intuition and knowing of my being. So that phrase that you referred to, soul forgetfulness, is a very important phrase in the teachings of the 9th century Irish teacher John Scottish Erugina, who says that we suffer from soul forgetfulness. That is, we've forgotten who we are. We've forgotten what is deepest in one another and in all things. And he says that the more deeply we forget and the more we live out of that forgetting, then the more we are treating one another as either less than sacred or somehow opposed to sacredness, so that it more and more affects how we view one another, how we listen to one another, what we expect of one another. But it also affects how we view and deeply doubt ourselves. To be reared in a tradition that has taught that what is at the heart of our being is sin or is opposed to God, is to instill a type of self-doubt that can also become a form of self-abuse or self-neglect or self-fulfilling prophecy if it is said that what's deepest in us is opposed to God. And Pelagius's point early on is that if you repeatedly tell your daughter that she is ugly, that she's stupid, that she knows nothing, then at some level she becomes that, she takes on that definition. And I think that this has been part of the tragedy of the doctrine of original sin. I sometimes refer it to as our obsessive compulsive disorder in the Western world. We can hardly get through a hymn or a creedal statement without going on about what shitbags we are. And if every time I entered the presence of my wife, I felt I had to go on about how horrible I am. I mean, she might like it once. If I did it every time I entered her presence, it would be a very sick relationship, and my guess is that it would no longer be a relationship. And yet that is what we've tolerated to the extent that we've given room to this doctrine of original sin. Eriugina's point about suffering from soul forgetfulness, this informs how he celebrates the Christ mystery. He sees Christ not as embodying a truth that is foreign to us, but rather sees Christ as disclosing to us the most intimate truth of our being. And Eriugina refers to Christ as our epiphany or our revelation. And the word revelation comes from the Latin root revelare, which just means to lift the veil. So he sees Christ embodying a foreign truth, but rather as lifting the veil to show you what is at the heart of your being, to show me what is at the heart of my being and all being. So the celebration of Christ is seen as an awakening presence, and this essentially is what we are being called to do and to be for one another. Not for me to try to change your nature, to try to change someone else's nature, but rather to be part of liberating the true beauty and the true wisdom of the divine that is in you from the gift of birth.
Well, as you're talking about this idea of soul forgetfulness, I think this may be part of the answer. But one of the things that I think about as we have talked about this idea and about your book is just kind of sometimes the adverse reaction that people have to this. It seems maybe like a foreign idea, or maybe an idea that's not allowable. And I'm just curious why would you say that you think people might have some of that response, or what kind of causes this pushback within us from this understanding of viewing ourselves and all of creation as part of the sacred?
Yeah, that's an important question. And I think one of the patterns that I tried to be aware of and to point to a certain extent in the book is that the controversy or the conflict that happens in the 4th century between a Celtic teacher like Pelagius and a teacher very much of the imperial tradition like Augustine of Hippo. I think one of the fascinating things about the retelling of that story is that it keeps happening. It keeps happening again and again over the centuries, and I find I can relate to that story because that's often how I am criticized or how I am misunderstood, just as Pelagius and many others before me in the Celtic world have been understood. So what was it that was happening in that debate between Augustine and Pelagius? And one of the things I say in that chapter is that Pelagius is probably the most grossly misunderstood and misrepresented teacher of all time. And it is a tragedy that misrepresentation of Pelagius continues in most of our Western Christian seminaries.
I can agree with that. I almost got thrown out of my theology class for that.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt
and certainly in Scotland, generation after generation of theological student was required to write an essay comparing Pelagius with St. Augustine, and it was known full well in advance who the hero was to be and who the villain was to be. And of course, there were many sort of mistruths spoken. We were told that there were no writings available from Pelagius, and that all that we could learn about him came through the mouth of his theological opponent, Augustine, which of course led to a very fair analysis of Pelagius. We weren't told where he was from. He could have been from anywhere in the universe, the way he was presented to us. We weren't told that he was a Celt and that what he was teaching was typical of Celtic Christianity. And we were told that he taught that we didn't need grace, that we had the capacity somehow to save ourselves. And when we access his writings, we find that he did not say that. But what he did say was that our nature is sacred. And so if we can try to get into the mind of Augustine, I don't want to turn Augustine into the villain. I don't want to reverse the tables here. There's nothing to be said for the telling of history in such terms. And certainly Augustine, anyone who reads the Confessions of St. Augustine, I think, realizes that we're in touch with a great Christian thinker and a man who desired to be true in his heart. But what was happening to Augustine? So Augustine heard Pelagius say that our nature is sacred, that within us is wisdom, that within us is beauty, that within us is a longing to love and to be compassionate. All these features of what it is to be made of God and to be made in the image of God. So Augustine hears Pelagius saying our nature is sacred. And what that equates to in Augustine's mind is, if you're saying we're sacred, then you must be saying that we don't need grace. And that is not what Pelagius was teaching. He was teaching that we are infected, we're wounded, and some of that wound comes at birth. The modern day teacher whom I so love and have received from is Matthew Fox, and about 30 plus years ago he wrote a seminal work called Original Blessing, very similar to what the Celtic tradition teaches, and that is that what is deepest in us is our blessedness of birth, being of God. And one of the phrases that Matthew has come to use, and I think it's an important one, he speaks also about original wound. So, at birth we carry some of the woundedness of our families. We carry some of the woundedness of our nations, of the human species. So to speak about original blessedness, or to say that what is deepest in us is of God, is not to be naive to the wounds that we also inherit at birth. So that's one of the sort of misunderstandings that just keeps happening. And I think because in our Western Christian tradition, so influenced by the Mediterranean or the imperial stream, we have been taught really that grace is opposed to nature, rather than grace and nature being seen as both of God. So someone like Pelagius says so simply, he says, it's Erigenes says, nature is the gift of being, and our being is sacred. Grace, he says, is the gift of well-being. That is, it's given not in opposition to our nature, but it's given to restore us to our nature. It's given not to make us something more than natural or other than natural. It's given to that we may be truly natural, truly live from the unspeakable glory of what it is to be made of God. So that's a repeated part of the story, Chris. And the other thing I'd like to say in relation to that important question that you're asking is is there a certain convenience or trade-off that happens when people are, in a sense, willing to be told that they know nothing? Uh, is the trade-off that therefore I don't have to do very much if I don't know anything? Is the trade-off I don't actually need to take much responsibility for reading my soul and accessing truth if I can sort of passively be told what to believe and what truth is by the teaching authorities above me? So I think there's a sort of curious and unhealthy trade-off that maybe happens in the story of this conflict between, is what is deepest in us of God, and therefore do we have responsibility? Because I think that's one of the demanding aspects of the Celtic vision, to say that the wisdom of the divine is in me, is to say, you need to read that inner text. You need to do this looking within, as your center is called, because it's not enough to just sort of passively receive what is dispensed from teaching authority above you or beyond you. Each one of us is responsible for doing this inner reading. And that's part of where the beautiful tradition of Anam Cara, or soul friend, is so important in the Celtic world, precisely because each one of us needs to do this reading of the inner text. It is vital that we have friends of the soul, those who love us well enough to challenge us. I need people around me who will say to me, in relation to what I say about the soul, or say about what is within me, I need people who love me enough to say, John Philip, who are you kidding? I mean, this sounds too convenient. This sounds too easy. So I need people around me who love me and can challenge me and help me go back to this inner text, to seek, to wrestle together. I love that this emphasis that I received so much from my rabbi brother Nachum Wardlev from New Mexico, wrestling with the divine within ourselves, and wrestling with the divine in one another, in order to get more and more clarity.
Yeah, as you're talking about this, I think one of the things that I appreciated about the book is that you certainly kind of give us this framework from all of these historical figures who are kind of part of this tradition and this thread of the Celtic wisdom. But you also kind of express it as an invitation to begin, and it's part of the subtitle of the book even. You get it's a lens through which we can view and step into the healing of the world, and I think that's an essential piece of this work, is that it isn't just a historical piece. It isn't just the knowledge that, yes, some people thought this way in the past, but I think it maybe can give us some really strong tools for finding our way forward in the world that we live in today. There's just lots of uncertainty today in in all sorts of arenas that maybe we didn't face or weren't aware of in the past. But I think that this Celtic wisdom can give us some tools to move forward and to, through that listening and deep paying attention, begin to move into something new.
Yeah. I think you're right to say that the struggle spiritually, and the struggle for what Christianity is going to look like for this moment in time and going forward. This is not unrelated to struggle and wrestling that's happening in many spheres. I think we're living at this time of great transition, when we're in the midst of being invited to reclaim inner authority, and not passively continue with how either political authority or cultural authority or religious authority has wanted to tell us to behave, or how to see, or how to believe. So it's an unsettled time in many of these spheres, but it's I find it an incredibly exciting time to be a son of the Christian household, because I think as so much of the old thing collapses, we are being invited to look to what is it that's trying to be born, what's trying to awaken within us. And in ages of transition, there's sometimes a tendency to opt for the fundamentalist option, that is, to pretend that everything of ultimate truth has already been stated and defined in the past, and that the way forward is in fact to go back. I mean, it's a version of "Make America Great Again." It's a version of, make Christianity great again, by going back to doctrinal and dogmatic statements that were articulated in the past. And we're not. I love what Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology, says when he makes a distinction between resurrection and resuscitation. Um, and he says, the Christian mystery is all about resurrection. It's about something new happening that we could not have imagined. And it's not to be confused with resuscitation. It's not to be confused with trying to bring to life again, or to breathe life into an old form.
To maybe shift just a little bit, just as we've been reading your book with some friends here, maybe one of my favorite chapters in the book, and certainly is I can speak for our group. They would all agree with me, because everybody does.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We're just speaking about the hierarchy of truth.
But one of our favorite chapters was the one about Saint Brigid of Kildare and the divine feminine, and where Christian faith has been co-opted by patriarchy and masculinity. The Celts from the very beginning lifted up the sacred feminine, and Brigid as their patron saint. And we just had St. Brigid's Day on February 1st. In your book, on page 69, you wrote, "The strength of the sacred feminine is deep within us, in both men and women, young and old. It is awakening again in our depths. We need to open to it now if we are to be well. The strength of the sacred feminine is deep within us, in both men and women, young and old. It is awakening again in our depths. We need to be open to it if we are to be well." Could you speak more to this? It's an ancient word and it's a fresh word all at once.
Yeah. I know we've been speaking about this as a transition time that we're in the midst of in so many ways, and it is no accident, I believe, that the increasing Earth consciousness that we're in the midst of resonates also with the increasing consciousness of the feminine, and the concerns about the Earth being expressed at the same time as a movement like the Me Too movement. These belong inseparably together. The awareness of sacredness of the Earth and awareness of sacredness of the feminine. And the way we, as a Western world, as a Western culture, have subordinated and wronged the Earth is often exactly the way we have wronged the feminine, and abused the feminine, or subordinated it. And one of the things I think I was trying to emphasize in those sentences that you read out, Dave, is to remember that the sort of face of the feminine, or what someone like Teilhard de Chardin later in the book calls the fragrance of the feminine, is deep within us all. And to be made of God is to be made of both the divine feminine and the divine masculine. And to speak about the recovery of the divine feminine is speaking about the recovery of a depth within us all that has been neglected. And we've in so much of our Western inheritance, religious, political, cultural, we've been dominated by a form of shadow masculine energy, which has been characterized by setting itself up over against the earth and over against the feminine. And I think part of this transition time that we are in is to see that false feminine, that false masculine, has no future. It has no ultimate future because it cannot be sustained. We are seeing what that way of domination and subordination is doing to our relationship with the earth. We are more and more seeing that humanity cannot sustain that falseness. So that way of falseness and domination, which is characterized by the shadow masculine, holds within it judgment. That is a judgment of its essential falseness, and it cannot be maintained, and we're becoming more and more aware of that now. But it also means, I think, that the recovery of the sacred feminine within us all as communities, and within women, within men, and within our relationships, that this sort of new cherishing of the feminine face of the divine is something that will lead us into greater clarity about what is the true masculine face of the divine. And I think many young men today of great sensitivity and of great longing are really struggling to know what it is to be young men, and what it is to truly access the masculine energies of the divine that are within us, because they're so aware that they've lived in an age that's been dominated by a very violent form, a very domineering form of masculine energy.
Looks like you have been working on that.
Yeah, well, the question I had might take us back a little bit into the a little bit of the conversation we were in earlier.
Was
But
it online or an in-house question?
this is an in-house question. So one of the things that you were talking about a little earlier was kind of in this time of uncertainty and unknowing, and the opportunity, obviously, for something new to be born and to be made. What I find striking is that a lot of people are using similar stories and similar language to describe very separate views and outcomes. For example, you talked a little bit about not necessarily looking to the religious or political authorities, but learning how we might kind of listen to ourselves and figure some of this out in terms of what makes sense for our communities. But we can come up with very different expressions of that, and sometimes some of those expressions are actually, I would say they're harmful, and maybe someone who disagrees with me would say my expressions are harmful. And I think maybe some of the answer is going a little further deep, but how would you answer this idea that sometimes what at least appears to be a deep knowing is in conflict between and among groups?
Yeah, that's a very important question. It makes me think of that story that I tell in chapter 1 in the Pelagius chapter. A young woman who writes to Pelagius and says, "Give me a rule of life. Tell me how to live." And Pelagius writes back to her saying, "Don't ask me. What has God written into you? what has been sort of etched into the very fabric of your being, made of God. So he says, learn to read what has been written into you. And once you've done this sort of reverent, attentive reading of the inner text of your life, then write it out on a piece of parchment and allow that to become your rule of life. But, he says, and this is the big but of the story, and it's the but that touches on your question, Chris. He says, but once you've done your reading and written out what you've read in your soul, then compare what you've written with Jesus. And he says, and if there's discord between what you've read in your soul and what you read in Jesus, in his life and his teachings, then know that you've misread your soul and go back and read again. There are two really important dimensions of that story. One is that he's saying, in a way that's very typical of the Celtic stream, we all need to do our own reading. I can't do your reading for you. You can't do it for me. We need to be doing it. And very importantly, of course, in the Anamkara relationship, we need to be doing it in relationships of love. And the second important dimension of that story is that he sees Christ as being our touchstone, our measuring rod. So he doesn't see Christ, as I was trying to say earlier, he doesn't see Christ as embodying a truth that is foreign to us, but rather as disclosing to us the deepest truths of our being, made of God. And so that's the story that points to the sort of tension, the challenge, and it's not about a sort of rampant individualism. I'll believe whatever I want to, and you believe whatever you want to. This is a tradition that is willing to do that wrestling around our shared belief in and commitment to the way of Jesus as our sort of measuring rod, as our touchstone. And that's not to pretend that there aren't, of course, also varied interpretations of what Jesus embodies. That's part of the history of the church. And that sometimes when we get stuck in our own ego, or when we get stuck in the collective ego of our particular tradition, then we end up wanting to, in a sense, co-opt Jesus and claim that we have that sort of authority, when in fact what we're doing is turning Jesus into the image of our religious tradition, which I think in the Celtic world, these teachers again and again are saying that that Jesus doesn't belong to us. He doesn't even belong to Christianity. He embodies the human soul, and he's always greater than any system.
So what you said there is brilliant, because you're talking about this understanding of Christ that is, the cosmic Christ, right? It's for all things everywhere. And one of the things that strikes me as I read this, and that would be explosive words, right? To many from different Christian traditions, that Christ, that Jesus isn't just for Christianity; it's for all. One of the things that has, kind of strikes me about this book is Pelagius. His teachings were banned by the church leaders at least 5 times, and are still being cracked on in schools all over the world today.
Yeah.
John Scotus Erigena banned 4 or 5 times. Alexander John Scott excommunicated from the church, and his own dad voted to do so. And even now in 2022, a friend of mine went to buy your book recently and was at the bookstore and found it under paganism. So what is it about Celtic wisdom that people still can't square it with Christianity in today's world?
Yeah. Well, I'll treat that as a compliment to the book. That. Yeah. I think that one of the things I have loved about a teacher like Martin Buber, the great 20th century Jewish teacher, he speaks about what he calls holy insecurity. And by that he means we can't depend on any statement of belief. We can't put our ultimate security in any outward religious form or declaration or practice. He says that our security needs to come only from our encounter with what he calls the thou, the sacred presence that is at the heart of you, that is at the heart of all things, that is at the heart of our own being. And one of the reasons why Buber loves to use the word thou to refer to the divine is because it's the only word that is not metaphor. So the only way in which we can truly speak about the divine is when we're addressing the divine in one another and deep in all things as thou, the one who bears no name, the one who in the story of self-revelation in Exodus says from the burning bush, when Moses says, "Who are you?" I want a name so that I can tell my people. And the response is, "I am who I am." And my rabbi reminds me that can also be, "I have been who I have been, and I will be who I will be." Don't try to name me. Don't try to tame me. Don't try to put me in a definition. So Buber says our security cannot be in any of these outward forms. Our only security can be found in the one who bears no names and will not be named, and that's why he calls it holy insecurity, because that's the nature of the faith that he is writing us into, to not place our security in outward form. And I think that a lot of our religious history has been about confess your faith in the words of the Nicene Creed, or whatever the historic equivalent may be in your tradition, or make sure that you get the sacrament regularly, or make sure that you confess Jesus to be your Lord and personal Savior in a particular formulation of faith. And you can just rest in that. And Buber says, no, we can't rest in any of those outward forms. Our only place of security is in faithful attentiveness to the divine presence at the heart of our being, at the heart of all being. And that's where we rest, only in that commitment to be true to be attentive to, and to love the shining of that presence in one another and in all things.
Did you have a question from? I don't want to miss if we
yep.
have. So.
I do have one from our group here. So so in the book, obviously, and we talked a little bit about this. You talk about the need to be aware of and understand the sacred feminine, and how that has been lost in so much of our tradition. But the question from our audience is, as we deepen and widen our understanding of gender constructs, identity, and sexuality, do you imagine that we move? I don't necessarily want to say beyond, because I think I want to include masculine and feminine as a piece of that. But what might those understandings of our own humanity bring to the table when it comes to experience?
Yeah, that's a really good follow-up question. It's very sort of connected to Dave's earlier question, because to of course say that that the only word that is not metaphor in referring to God is the word thou. That's to speak about how we address and approach and perceive the otherness of the divine, from whom we have come and all things have come. Your question, I think, very importantly touches on the withinness of the divine, and it's to say that you are of the unnameable one. So there are certain things that you may love to say about yourself. I, for instance, am proud to say I'm Scottish Canadian. Proud to say I'm a father. I say I'm a man. I'm a Christian. These terms that I use to point to something of who I am. But while I may use many of these terms in trying to speak of you, Chris, at the end of the day, it's so important for me to remember that you are of the one who cannot be named, and that the true heart of your being is of that thou-ness that I can't label it. And so often, we try to put a label on another in order to have some sort of control over expectation of what the other is to be. And of course, we've done a lot of that in terms of sexuality, and we've struggled with that. Racially, we've struggled with that. Between nations in which we exalt, we say that, oh, you had to be British or to be American. We behave as if the world existed to serve Britain and America and so on. So we've used those nationality labels, and I think similarly we've often used sexual orientation labels and other labels to almost create a pecking order in society, or say you are to behave, according to my understanding of what an American is to be, or a Christian is to be, or a man is to be, or a woman is to be. And we need to keep being taken back into that unspeakable mystery that each one of us is, and to live out of our thou-ness, to live with the sort of the forever unfolding of the thou-ness of the divine within us, and I think we're being invited to really reverence that part of that depth of one another. And it's one of the reasons why I so love the Eastern form of greeting of Namaste. The divine in me honors the divine in you. The sacred in me reverences the sacred in you. Because I think when we do that, then we can't force the other into all of these categories that we've treated as absolute, as fixed, as somehow forbidden to move into the fluidity of the flow of life and the flow of the universe. The universe is forever trying to find new form, new expression. It has this one flow of life deep within it, but what does that one flow do? it is forever trying to find new form, new expression, new utterance.
This idea kind of reminds me of something you wrote about one of the key teachings of Pelagius. It's not necessarily what you believe about Jesus is important, rather it's becoming like Jesus that matters. To me, that takes practice, right? And you end each chapter with a meditation as a way of taking the work of these Celtic teachers to heart. How else might we practice this unique way of seeing, this unique way of becoming like Jesus? Is it stillness, meditation, social action, something else?
Just before I forget that important distinction that Pelagius says, it doesn't matter so much what you believe about Jesus, it's whether you're becoming like Jesus. In a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to be in San Francisco and preaching at Grace Cathedral, and one of the great things about preaching in these traditions that have a lectionary is that you have to preach on, you have to preach on what the scripture you're reading is that day, and not just go back to your favorite passage. And the passage that I was given is in fact one that I love. It sort of set me on fire as a young theological student. It's those words coming out of the Beatitudes in St. Luke's Gospel. And as I've been struggling with what to say in that sermon, I remembered that the former dean of Grace Cathedral, Alan Jones, said, "We are not to be a religion about Jesus. We are to be a religion of Jesus." And it touches on your point. It's not so much what we say or what we feel we can say about Jesus. It's about whether we are embodying in our own lives and allowing the radical and challenging teachings of Jesus about loving not just your neighbors and your friends, loving your enemy. It's about not just lending with reasonable interest rates. It's about lending, expecting nothing in return. It's about forgiving. It's about doing to others what you would have them do to you. This is what a religion of Jesus is about. It's not being a religion about Jesus. It's not saying, I believe in Jesus as the only begotten Son of God. I mean, that's to start putting statements on Jesus, defining ourselves in terms of whether we can line up with those statements. The sort of how to be a religion of Jesus, or how it is that we in the Christian household can more deeply embody and continue this inheritance of what we received in our Christian stream, this great sort of teachings of Jesus, this great life of Jesus. It is as you've already pointed. For me, it's on a daily basis paying attention to practices of prayer and meditation, and it's some of that is disciplines of meditation on my own. Some of it's finding disciplines of meditation and silence with others. It's through these practices of being very intentional about showing my soul to those, the anampara, those who love me enough to challenge me when I try to show what's stirring in my soul. So it's this sort of individual discipline and commitment, and it's this discipline and commitment in the context of relationship, and it's knowing that these continued disciplines of study and spiritual practice, both individually and together, that these are to be measured in terms of action. How does my study, how does my spiritual practice, how does it flow into acts of compassion? How does it flow? How does it allow me to be merciful? How does it allow me to do to others as I would have them do to you? That's the measuring rod. I mean, that's where any great claim to spirituality is to be in terms of what it's enabling us to do together. And I think that's why any sort of school of spirituality, any sort of church or faith community, I think we're being called to give real focus to, well, where is our study and spiritual practice? Where is our sense of community going? Where's the outflow? Where's the sort of movement of love in action?
With echoes of George MacLeod's question to you all those years ago, what are we to do about all of this? Yeah.
That's right. I don't know if I mentioned in that chapter, but so I mean, for those who may not have read the book yet, so George MacLeod, who was around 80 at that stage, and I was around 20, so I was this sort of young theological student. He was this legendary prophetic figure, founder of the modern day Iona community. And I remember sort of hearing him speak publicly. First time I heard him speak publicly, it was like a sort of coming home experience for me. Here was this great Christian teacher speaking about the sacredness of the earth, speaking about the non-violence of Jesus as the way of true relationship, both individually and collectively, nationally. And so in hearing him, I had this the sense of awakening to what was sort of dearest or deepest in me, even though I wouldn't yet have had the language before that to say this is, you know, this is the passion that will direct and guide my life. So there was this sense of coming home and hearing about him. I hadn't yet met him, but I had this realization: I need somehow to get close to this man, and as the universe sometimes provides, with synchronicity, you know, a few months later, I bumped into him on a path on Iona, and he invited me and Ali, my wife, back for a whiskey, as it turned out, and I don't think I'd ever had a whiskey at that point, but and certainly not in the afternoon. But you know, when a great man says, "Come back for a whiskey," you go back for a whiskey, and we had our first conversation, and speaking about how we were to care for the environment and how we were to work for unilateral nuclear disarmament in our nation and other things. And it was at the end of that conversation that he said to me, "Well, what are we going to do about this?" And those words have become more and more important to me over the years. I mean, I think a couple of things. One is he was a great legend. He could have said, "Young man, let me tell you." what you are to do or what we are to do. But he didn't believe in that. He believed in we. What are we going to do about this? And the other thing is, he wasn't asking me what I was going to think about this, what I was going to say about this. He was asking me what I was going to do about it. And that's the prophetic challenge that I believe is deep in our Christian Jewish inheritance. These are, the greatness, the charism of these traditions is that they're about action.
And I feel like that might be a great spot for us to land. It's, to take these ideas and what are we to do about this, and as a call to action in whatever ways that means that we live that out. I just would want to thank you so much, John Philip, for being a part of our conversation today, being a part of this extended community. We're so thankful for your insight, for opening us up to the Celtic wisdom and these Celtic teachers. I'd also like to thank everybody who's joining us today, whether it's in our studio audience here or online. Know that we will be posting video of this conversation on the YouTube and Facebook pages, and we will be releasing an audio version of this conversation as a part of the Sandbox Cooperative podcast. For those who are local to Rochester, in the Minnesota area, we are looking, the Looking Within Center is going to be doing a book study on Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul, beginning on Wednesday, March 2nd. And actually, I believe that we'll actually have an online version as well. So if you are interested in checking out this book study and being a part of it, and ongoing conversation on some of the themes that we heard John Philip talk about just now, please check the Looking Within Center Facebook page and check out our website as well. We have several copies of the book on hand if you'd like to purchase one, or you can go to wherever you find books, but make sure that you check out the paganism section. But for now, on behalf of the Looking Within Center, on behalf of Julie Stevens, thanks for joining us today, and until next time, we'll see you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Blessings to you. I'll look out for you at the school or on Iona or wherever we are graced to meet again.
That would be wonderful, and if we do so, let's have a whiskey.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.